So the first thing you do is you go to the website, take a look at the rules, regulations, learn about what the rules are that we have for MMA. Then the next tab they would go to is forms. They would just download a membership form for their club, print it out, fill in their application form. There's a payment for an annual fee that the club pays for, which really allows them to get insurance within our organization, and then allows the club to join. As soon as they've joined the organization, within 5 to 10 business days, our staff at our office, we mail them a package, and in the package it's got their insurance forms, it's got their individual athlete membership forms. We stay in contact with that club to let them know, now if you want to compete, here's the steps that you need to take. Your coaches have to do the following, your athletes have to do the following. Once they've done that, they can enter competitions.
Perfect. And the last thing I wanted to ask is, there was some criticism in some of the media about the event not being really organized or run by martial artists.
Right.
Could you give us a little insight into exactly how the rules and regulations were created, and
Right.
who were the officials at the event? What were the judges scoring on?
Right.
How was this all written up?
Okay. I can answer that question in a couple ways. I can go back a year and a half and sort of scope you through how we got to this point, or I can just talk about the event. So I'm actually going to talk about the event first, because I think that's probably the most important thing that people want to know about. We actually looked at the rules that existed for amateur MMA in different jurisdictions in the U.S. So we looked at Ohio and Pennsylvania. We looked at the unified rules for amateur MMA. We looked at all those rules, and then we looked at some of the rules that existed for competitive jiu-jitsu. And then we looked at our rules for amateur kickboxing. Once we had all the rules on the table, we had to then communicate with our stakeholders, which included government and our insurance company, to figure out what kind of rules can we create that are true to the sport of MMA, but also are going to meet the needs of both insurance companies and the government, so that we don't have to pay $5 million to even get a policy to allow us to even do this, or ensure that the government feels that what we're doing is both regulated and we've got good justifiable evidence for certain rules that we want to have around amateur MMA. There was a collective of individuals coming from the industry that did this, and again, I said earlier, MMA is not my sport, so I was actually not part of that group. The group consisted of club owners from CASC that have backgrounds in professional MMA, amateur MMA, jiu-jitsu, wrestling, and Muay Thai and kickboxing. And I do want to mention some names, because I think it's important for the people that have volunteered their time, and I want to emphasize the fact that these are all volunteers. They run their clubs, that's their daytime job, and in their evening and on weekends, they came to meetings for a year and a half to create this program. So Jesse Richardson from Matador MMA, who's worked with both amateurs and professionals, Chris and Blaine Bonafoco from Modern Vision MMA, who also work with professionals and amateur MMA athletes. Joey Del Reyes, who runs Combat Arts in Mississauga, also works with amateurs and professionals. They were the central team that created these sets and rules and regulations. But they worked with over a dozen clubs within CAS to get their feedback. So we had clubs that have professional athletes, both in kickboxing, Muay Thai, and MMA, and so we'd vet the rules through those people. As a democratically based organization, our member clubs are the ones that decide what we do and what we don't do. Myself and a few people on the board communicate directly with government and the insurance companies, the Canadian Association for Sport Medicine, a lot of university professors that sit on our board, our legal team that advises us on the direction of our organization. We would get feedback from those professionals around what we were doing. But ultimately, this whole process took a year and a half. So when we created the rules and regulations, it was done by a starting point, which was, these are the current rules that exist. And as a side note, one of the things I'll mention, there wasn't a lot of clarity on what amateur MMA rules are consistent across North America. There was the unified rules. Our committee felt that some of that was vague, so they really couldn't get a grasp on when bouts would be ended, what areas around striking would be allowed when one person is standing, one person is grounded. So there was a lot of gray area that needed to be filled in, but we took the best that we could. Our job was not to criticize other people trying to do what we're trying to do. Our job was simply to look at what best practices exist out there and how could we create something that's going to work in Ontario. Once those rules were developed by that committee of people with expertise, they then took that and created an officials training program, trained and mentored a group of officials, felt strongly that we didn't have enough time to really feel comfortable that all those folks who are also volunteers were quite ready to officiate. So that committee actually ended up officiating at that first event in Toronto. So those 4 people were our central judges and referees. There's one other individual that they brought in that they felt was the most competent. And now we're sort of going back to the drawing board and saying, well, what do we do now to have another core group of people? Because this committee of 4 people can't officiate MMA for the next 5 years. I mean, they're going to get very tired. So we need to now start grooming another group of officials that could do that for us. So that's my first answer around how we got to this point. The criticisms that were levied were very few and far in between. I mean, the clubs that participated, the athletes that were there, the spectators that watched, I think for the most part, the feedback was extremely positive. The bouts were very action-packed. People weren't sure what they were going to see, and they thought it would be a watered-down version of the professionals. But I think they saw some exceptional bouts. I think in the end, the scoring system that we had tended to favor the grapplers and people on the ground more so than people that were standing up. I know that was one of the concerns that people had about a kickboxing group now regulating MMA, but I think the way our rules are structured and the way the point system is structured, it actually favors the ground game more than it does striking. I mean, you land 1 punch or kick, you get 1 point. You pass the guard, you get 2 points. A takedown, you get 3 points. There's a lot more points that are given on the ground than there are standing up. So the negative feedback that we got, I think is important. I'll be the last person to say that our machine is perfect, that our rules are 100% the way they should be. So the feedback that we get that's critical, that offers suggestions, is something I think that's very important for us. Because any of that kind of feedback, I think, will help our organization grow. It'll help us be a little bit reflective and looking at what we're doing and saying, you know what, could this go better? Kickboxing and Thai boxing, since we started in 2004, has also evolved. I mean, we started off with more equipment at the beginning. We actually have less equipment now. We started off giving a lot of standing 8 counts in the first few years. We're actually giving less now. And a lot of that has to do with the maturing of our sport and the maturing of the organization as we grow. This was our first event. I'm quite happy with the outcome of the first event. But I think it would be, inappropriate for me to say that it was 100% perfect. I'd give it a 7 out of 10. I give my committee 10 out of 10, but I think overall, we're at a 6.5 to 7 out of 10, and I think we need to keep sort of working forward. If I was to go backwards, I think it's important to people to understand that in coming to this point, we had to work with a series of stakeholders to get here. The government had a number of concerns that are coming from other stakeholder groups, including the medical community, the insurance community, people in other combative sports that maybe don't see MMA as a real sport, versus Olympic sports like judo and wrestling and boxing, which are considered real sports in the eyes of some individuals. So we had to really look at those stakeholders and say, how do we get those folks to work with us? And how do we get them to feel a part of the process? Because one thing I don't like doing is I don't like giving lip service to collaboration. Like if I have a person that worked for an insurance company or representative in government, I want them to be part of our group. So we actually had them interwoven into our group. We had meetings with our insurance broker and the government with our committee. So we can actually start looking at what is it that we're doing and what are their big concerns are and how do we address them. This process took us, almost 2 years. So I think when I hear some of the negative feedback, when the feedback becomes uneducated, I can't believe they have this rule. I would hope those of you that are educated in the audience will say, I wonder how this group actually got to this point and what are the things that they had to do to get here, because that I think is part of the whole picture. And then I think those same educated people in the audience will then say, wow, I want to get involved in this and I want to give my piece of feedback, which is how I feel this could get better. And we'll take that and we'll move on to the next phase. CSC and our competitive program will look different in 2013 than it does now. And it sure better look different in 2015 than it does now. Because if it doesn't, then we're becoming stale and stagnant. And the purpose of our organization is to make sure that we evolve and grow with time.
Perfect.